Okay, I'm going to give this a shot. Holland, Squalin, Quis, Taliknamat, Tla, Squamish, Away, yeah. Welcome to the Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. I'm Councillor Chris Pettingill, chairing for the month of April as acting mayor the Committee of the Whole agendas. So we have the Committee of the Whole, an amended Committee of the Whole agenda for April 2nd. Would someone like to move adoption of the agenda? Thank you. John? Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So our first delegation is Gerry Kasten from VCH at Vancouver Coastal Health, and he's a public health dietitian. And Gerry, why don't you take it away?
Okay, you can see my slideshow up above me, I'm sure. Who's advancing the slides?
I think that's you.
This one? There, it's not depicted here.
It's not depicted there.
No?
Who's the next one?
Go there.
Where is it? Oh, there it is.
That's it. I see it, whatever is up there. Excuse me.
Just do the down slide.
Okay.
The down arrow.
We're all
What's
set.
going on here, so this, just remember, this is it.
Or go to slideshow mode?
I think it's not talking to this one, it's really.
Okay,
Yeah,
whatever.
so let's just minimize
I can just
it.
leave that.
I just don't want to confuse you. So then just try.
Okay, there we go. Technology triumphs. So this is just a quote from Upworthy that really speaks to the challenges, excuse me, the challenges around food affordability. And so there are 500,000 British Columbians who can't afford a basic healthy diet, that basically about 1 in 10 British Columbian families are dealing with food insecurity. And it's 1 in 6 children. So, oh, there it is. 1 in 10 in VCH. So the key thing about food insecurity, one often hears the term food security, which refers to a much larger picture of the availability of food and our access to food in a sustainable manner. But food insecurity is the inadequate access to food due to financial constraints. And it takes a major toll on our healthcare system. That 1 in 6 children are living in homes where they're struggling to be fed. We know that healthcare costs are twice as high because people who are living in food insecure households have a significant higher level of all chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, osteoporosis, any chronic disease you would care to name are higher in food insecure households. Plus, they are subject to mental health issues as well. And so, I brought along a copy of the Food Costing in British Columbia 2017 report. This is our most recent data. So, who do I submit that to? Just pass it around. I do also have electronic copies if you want those. And so, long story short, average monthly cost in Vancouver Coastal Health is $1,056 for a family of 4. So that's a monthly cost. I'm not sure if they have they don't have the data. Particularly in Vancouver, it's an issue that some of the costing, we randomly select our stores for costing. So in Vancouver, they have all those fancy schmancy high-end stores. And so it drops, excuse me, it drops almost $100 when you take out those randomly selected. So that's your Whole Foods, your Meinhardts, the really high-end grocery stores. So they do skew the totals in Vancouver. They don't have as much impact on Vancouver Coastal Health as a whole. In 2017, for the first time, we were allowed to collect data at the local health area level. So our health service delivery area is North Shore Coast Garibaldi, which includes North Vancouver, West Vancouver, and Sea to Sky, as well as the Sunshine Coast and the Central Coast. So Bella Coola, Bella Bella, all of that area. But our local health area is Sea to Sky. And so our food costs in Sea to Sky, you can see, are slightly increased over the Vancouver Coastal Health average cost. So we're $1,073. And that includes, we've basically got permission. Our random selection is much less random because we just basically costed all of the stores, all of the stores in Sea to Sky. So this is basically an average cost amongst all Sea to Sky stores. So this is the lowest level for data that I have. I don't have Squamish data, Whistler data, Pemberton data. We don't have that. We only have it at the local health area data. And the reason this is an issue is that the root cause of food insecurity is not the price of food. And this is a critically important point, that it's not the price of food, it's poverty. That when we look at the costs of food for people living at different income levels, that for someone living on income assistance, it's 44% of their income. Whereas someone who's living in a family where they're living on a median wage, it's actually only 14% of their income. And so, as you likely realize, nobody has 44% of their income to spend on food because they're spending it all on housing. Also, this was based on figures prior to the recent $50 a month increase in income assistance rates, so that dropped it to 43% rather than 44%. And so this is the big issue, is not the cost of food overall, but rather the cost of food as a proportion of income, because people can't afford to eat healthy food, and that's what leads to the increase in risk for both mental health issues and for chronic disease. So in order to address this, we need to think about new ways of talking about food insecurity. For many years, we've talked about things like community gardens, community kitchens, and other local food programs. And those things are excellent. They really help with social connectedness, which in turn makes connections to mental health issues. And they also produce a more sustainable food system, and so address the larger issue of food security. But sadly, they do not ameliorate food insecurity, because only income can do that. Food insecurity is not a food issue, it's an income issue. And we have ample research that shows this. And so we need income-based solutions to help achieve it. And so it's really about spending our money earlier on to help reduce costs in the future. And so our committee came up with this FACE acronym, that we need to think of food insecurity as an income-based problem. We need to assess, right? We have to get the data, and so we've done that. And we need to connect with people who are working on poverty reduction and engage others so that people understand that this is an income-based issue rather than a food access issue. And so, what can local counselors do? Right? Because we know you're not in charge of income. So first off, we know that counselors are well connected both at the level of things like UBCM, but also sometimes politicians know other politicians sometimes. And so really we're looking to you to start talking about food insecurity as an income-based issue and advocates for those policy solutions that are income-based policy solutions. And so that's it. They told me I have 5 minutes. So now I have lots of other data. I do have, I brought along 5 copies of this highly colored infographic, which cites those figures plus more, and also gives you figures on food, household food insecurity. So I brought 5 copies of that, and again, do have those electronically, so I can share them electronically. And so I look forward to any questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Council, any questions? Councilor Stoner.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I really do appreciate the reframing on the issues of food insecurity. I think it's really important. It's a really interesting deviation from where we've been in kind of food systems mentality to date. My question is around, in 2018, the province passed Together BC and the Poverty Reduction Strategy and Act. And from your perspective, how does that start to address this issue? Does it go far enough? And is there anything, is that a piece of legislation that we can aim to try and strengthen to help support this, or where does that
I think
fit
that
into
it will contribute to it. So some of the key actions for that are things like an actual increase in the amount of funds. So any increased amount of funds will help, right? It's not huge amounts. It's $133 a month in families that have one child, $216 a month more for 2 children, and $283 a month more for 3 children. Now that actually is congruent with the findings of the food basket, because what we find is that in larger families, food tends to be slightly more affordable. And conversely, in small families or individuals. So the data that I have for 4 people, of course that's 4 people data, but you can't just divide by 4. It actually costs 1.2 times as much for a single person. But then if you're living in a family of 5 or 6 people, it costs 0.95 as much to feed your family per person. So those will increase. The other thing is in the information I passed around, you do have some minimum wage data there. Right? When we look at food bank usage, that 63% of the people who are utilizing food banks are employed. So we know that minimum wage needs to increase to reach an adequate living wage level. And the poverty reduction strategy intends to increase minimum wage to $15.50 by 2021. And then there are childcare subsidies that will make childcare in effect available at no cost for people whose family income is $45,000 a year or less. So that, again, increasing access to childcare, particularly economic access to childcare, helps to reduce the overall expenditures of your family and means you may be able to use your money in other ways. There's also, the Ministry for Poverty Reduction has asked an expert panel to deliver a report on the potential for a basic income by 2020. So in another year, that report will be issued to the government and we'll see what happens. You're likely aware of the pilot that was run in Ontario and was recently cancelled by the government there. And so, and then you may also be aware of the 1977 basic income experiment in Dauphin, Manitoba, which again was quite successful. It was very interesting because the number one thing that people did with money was seek further education. So, not sure if that was like a big answer to a short question.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Yes, perhaps the report that you've passed around that we'll be interested to check into later might answer my question, but I'm wondering about the federal level. If we compare to the topic of housing affordability, we have the CMHC, which does work in background work in providing evidence-based standards, information, measurement protocol. Is there an equivalent body or program at the federal level examining these issues and advising us on the national level?
Statistics Canada does gather some data. We, in the development of this data, we actually use a national tool. It's called the National Nutritious Food Basket, and it's 67 items, which have very minimal processing. So it's like fruits and vegetables and bread and flour, and so it's very unprocessed meat, right? There are no processed foods included, and it's very, very basic. Like people sometimes like, oh, there's cookies in that. And I always like to point out that they're those nice tea biscuits. That's just barely a cookie. One step up from a cracker. So there's a wide variety of those, so that we use that National Nutritious Food Basket in order to collect our data. And so Statistics Canada does do ongoing work collecting that data, but they collect it at very broad levels. They don't even have it at the health region level. I believe the lowest level that they have is, they do have big municipalities like Metro Vancouver, and then they have provinces. But they don't have the localized data that we've been able to gather.
Should we follow?
Many of us around the council table here are involved from time to time, and Christmas time, for example, in home food hamper delivery and this sort of thing, and we are exposed to conversations and families and issues over the years. My question relates to education, and as a piece of the toolbox or part of the picture, does this report or does your program address education opportunities? In the old days, we used to call it home economics, but as you might imagine, a lot of the volunteers around these things are people from the older generation. When they see the amount of processed food being placed into these hampers and the opportunities to improve the quality and preparation, if you like, at home of these foods, and this is a factor, not as you are focused on income, then I think that's quite convincing. But is there attention given to this topic of educational programming in your initiatives?
So both federally and provincially, there is attentiveness to what's currently being called food literacy, which is about how do you cook, how do you prepare foods. So one aspect of that is a movement to seek standardization across the province, because you may know that home economics education is currently an optional subject at the grade 8 level, and at all other. We do have some excellent commercial cooking programs, both here in Squamish and in Pemberton. But again, what our research tells us is that the issue is not about how to prepare foods. Certainly when you talk about hampers, some of the challenges for that is that there are real challenges in distributing perishable foods. So vegetables and fruits don't keep. And food banks face that issue constantly, that they have a really hard time distributing fresh food. And so there's challenges there, and those are addressed in league with our environmental health officers, who are constantly working with food banks to try to maximize the amount of fresh food that they can do. And then secondly is around donations, that particularly when people are donating food, they're often donating processed foods. There's not a lot of fresh food donated. And again, you can look to things like the collection bins in our grocery stores, that people aren't putting fruits and vegetables in those. They're putting in, for the most part, canned goods. Part of it is that food banks are making a shift away from the way that they've monitored food. So until this point in time, food banks have typically monitored their food distribution in pounds of food. So canned goods look great. And fresh foods are much more challenging when you're talking about pounds of food. So they really are shifting, and the Greater Vancouver Food Bank actually recently developed policies about what foods they will accept, because they do get a lot of, for example, baked goods. Commercial packaged baked goods are often cleared, the shelves are cleared and donated to the food redistribution system. I mean, I think, as you all know, we have an excellent resource here in Squamish with Under One Roof, or a potential resource with Under One Roof, because of Helping Hands and the food bank and the way they've set that up with the ability to reprocess donated food. So that's very exciting. But I don't think that food literacy is as big a contributor to food insecurity as is economic access.
Any other council questions? Councillor Snorer?
Just curious about VCH's connection and any affiliation with Food Secure Canada and their advocacy work around a federal food policy.
So we don't have any direct connection. I'm aware of Food Secure Canada's work, but there's, their funding is completely separate, and because they're working at the federal level, whereas VCH is much more locally targeted, whether it's for the municipalities that are within VCH, but and then as you're likely aware, the food policy initial draft was just released last week. So food policy, I would say, does to a large degree address issues of food security and the sustainability of the food supply, particularly in places like Canada where we don't currently produce enough food to feed everyone. Here in British Columbia, we probably do better than many provinces in that we potentially could feed about 75% of our population using only BC stuff, only BC foodstuffs. We don't. We currently only feed about 30% and all the rest is exported. We export an enormous amount, and just generally in Canada, as again, you've likely heard because of the recent canola issues with China's acceptance of Canadian canola. We produce a lot of food in Canada. Much of it is exported.
Thank you. So I see we have a couple minutes left and some people in the gallery. Is there anyone that would like to come to the table and ask a question of Mr. Kasten? Do you have any final thoughts?
No, just really to iterate that I feel like these are issues that would be well brought before the Union of BC Municipalities because I feel that as a body, UBCM does wield a lot of influence. I think it is challenging, and I think this council has done, or Squamish Council over the years has done a good job of addressing food security issues and is aware of what's going on in Squamish. And so I just iterate my call to urge you to bring these issues up because it's very common to seek things like community gardens and community kitchens because those are really good, feel-good things. Even the charitable food sector it makes people feel good. But what we need is advocacy around income because that will truly ameliorate food insecurity and build a healthier population.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the clear and focused presentation.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It is quite literally my job. So, thank you so much.
Thanks, Gerry.
And next we have Ms. Glenday.
Linda on the radio.
Okay, thank you, Council. As you are aware, but the public may not be, a couple weeks ago I had the opportunity to attend a mission, is what it's called, in Jordan, and it's part of the Jordan Municipal Support Project that's led by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the project itself because it's multifaceted and then the specific
Can you just remind us who you are?
part. Yeah, sorry. Linda Glenday, Chief Administrative Officer here at the district. So yes, I'll tell you about the project generally and then the specific component that I was involved in. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is the federal association for municipalities, and this is what they refer to themselves as the National Voice for Canada's Local Governments. And currently there are over 2,000 municipalities that are members. The FCM, which is Federation of Canadian Municipalities International Program, is actually quite wide in scope. There are a number of different countries, and you'll see the list in a moment. But their belief is that we can build strong partnerships in the global arena. And they work with Global Affairs Canada to provide these programs. CEDA used to be the Canadian International Development Program, got folded into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and is now primarily leveraged through FCM with Global Affairs Canada. So that's where the funding comes from. These are the countries where there have historically and currently been projects, and the 3 end goals there. So building local government capacity on a global scale to improve the world generally and improve Canada and these other countries. Opportunities, in terms of those that are, have the opportunity to participate in the mission, is both elected officials and municipal staff can attend. They build their own skills, build business ties, and then Canada generally, through this program, is contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is a worldwide call to end poverty, protect our environment, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. So the Jordan Municipal Support Project specifically, this is a picture of the national event where I had the opportunity to be a keynote speaker and then part of a panel. In this picture, the woman in the middle is the mayor of the county of Colchester in Nova Scotia, a town of 38,000 people. She's the first female mayor they've ever had. On the visual right of her is a woman named Lama, and she's one of the project managers in Jordan who works for FCM. So the background in terms of this project is Jordan decentralized formally by law in 2015. So the king of the country decided that local governments were required in order to better run the country and provide for its citizens. So that's very, very recent. They had their first local elections in 2017. So in 2015, oops, I'm jumping ahead, this display always throws me off. So anyway, the decentralized goals of Jordan specifically are on that list. And the first is to broaden responsibilities of local administrations, increase citizen participation. This is a huge component of it, which you can relate to in terms of engagement and getting citizens to own delivery of services and getting involved, identifying priorities, and then distribute development gains for the whole country more equitably. So there's a huge financial component of this decentralization in terms of budgeting and distributing the country's wealth. So in 2015, the Canadian Embassy invited FCM, and the Governor General also went to Jordan. And essentially they were scoping out how Canada specifically could help them to strengthen the municipal sector. The USA is also involved through USAID. They have a lot of programs there as well. So in line with the Canadian government's mandate to help Jordan achieve long-term development objectives in education, sustainable economic growth, and the municipal governance. In addition, there's a component of this that was originally brought forward based on the Syrian refugee crisis. So Jordan has an open border policy, and in the region, they are taking in many, many refugees. And currently, I believe it's 1.4 million Syrian displaced people are living in Jordan, 85% of which are living in actual municipalities. So, 15% of that number are living in what we see on the news as traditional refugee camps, but the majority are living in towns. So when we were doing a briefing on the situation, there was a town that the population was 80,000, and almost overnight, the population grew to 240,000 people. So you can imagine the strain on infrastructure with that. Generally speaking, though, with this project, in addition to the Syrian refugee crisis, generally the municipal sector needs a lot of shoring up as it relates to infrastructure and leadership capacity and governance. So the purpose is to strengthen the resilience of the Jordanian municipalities, and it's in central and southern Jordan right now, so it's not all municipalities, but there are 12 specific municipalities that FCM has partnered with. Now this is the map. It's a little small, but the 12 municipalities are in white there. Put that up another time, and I won't pretend to be able to remember the names or pronounce them. I learned three Arabic words while I was there, and the team was laughing. They said maybe next time I'll get up to 10, but it's a beautiful language, just not easy to learn. The Jordan Municipal project has 3 components to it. So the first is establishing a training institute, and this really is capacity building. So it's a training institute for municipal staff and elected officials, and the idea, it's like a train the trainer type of idea where eventually the municipalities will be able to continue to train their own staff and elected officials. And there were a couple of people that I do know through the Local Government Management Association that have gone over from BC and from other municipalities that their strength is strategic planning and facilitation, and they provided this side of it. The second is solid waste management. So this is a huge component of building municipal capacity in Jordan. So without decentralization, previously infrastructure and solid waste systems specifically were lacking, if exist at all. Also with the influx of more and more population, primarily from Syria, their ability to deal with solid waste, with growth being so quick, it's been very, very difficult. Interestingly though, a lot of the municipalities came to FCM and said, like as an example, we want a cardboard recycling system or plant. And they said, okay, well let's come and do some solid waste audits. And I met a woman there who had just finished 6 weeks of going around and doing solid waste audits. And what they found is this particular municipality that wanted a cardboard recycling facility, 2% of their waste was cardboard. So it's capacity building from an information and education side of things, in terms of what's really needed versus what municipalities think they need. And a lot of it is around behavior change. And they talk about gender equity here in terms of, especially in the rural areas, it's still primarily the females that run the household, but it's the females that shop and create a lot of the garbage that comes out of the household and how to manage the garbage. So it's really at this point, waste auditing, community engagement, education, and behavior change before any money really goes into a massive amount of infrastructure. So it's making those behavior changes and then assisting with the infrastructure. This project is 5 years long, and the federal government has put $19 million towards it, and FCM has put $1 million towards it. So it's a $20 million 5-year project, which seems substantial, but that doesn't include any kind of infrastructure. That's Jordanian budget to build infrastructure. So the last is public engagement and knowledge sharing. And again, you know, this council, our community understands the value of public engagement and creating citizen ownership. Strategic networks and platforms. This is this pillar of the project that the event I was at refers to, and a lot of it is around gender and equity generally. So gender equity and socially inclusive practices and tools. Any questions?
Councilor Roos?
How many people were on this mission? Was there anybody else from this area or BC?
I can get there once I get to the actual specifics of what I did. I just thought around the project generally before I get into that.
No, I'm sorry.
No, that's
I
okay.
thought you finished.
No, not finished. So direct beneficiaries of the overall project, obviously the staff and elected officials, the community groups, and women and youth across all 3 components of the project. Engaging with women and youth in terms of building capacity is a huge part of the project itself, and of course the gender equity issue is a large part of it. Indirect, of course, are the community members, private sector partners, the displaced individuals, community-based organizations, and that should have been another bullet, is the Canadian municipal staff involved in the project. So, the mission I was a part of was a relatively short one. Most of the missions that go over to do this Jordan project, municipal support project, are anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. So the waste audits through the 12 municipalities was 6 weeks. The Training Institute missions are 2 weeks, where they go out to different municipalities, not all 12. This was a one-day event. That was the first time they've done it. It's centered around International Women's Day. And the theme for International Women's Day this year was Think Equal, Think, Build, and Innovate for your municipality was this event. So what did I have to do? I had to deliver, or I was asked to deliver a keynote speech. And primarily what they wanted me to talk about, which I did, were my stories. So it was interesting because I got there and I had this, like speech written out. I had 15 minutes to talk. That's a long time. And, different from a council meeting where you've got a PowerPoint, some things to talk about. So I was a bit stressed, and we had a debrief day. It was a full day wherein we went to the Jordan Municipal Sport Project. Has their own office in Amman, Jordan, with about 10 staff that are Jordanian but are hired by FCM. And we did a fabulous day. Originally, the morning was about learning the cultural context about their country, and I mean, you could do a whole university course on it, obviously, but they gave us a bit of a background. And then they talked about the event itself, the objectives, and then the cultural context around what we were going to be talking about. And at that point, they said to me, they just want to hear your stories. Just tell a bunch of stories. And I was like, I can do that. So I pivoted what I was going to talk to them about. They did say, and I knew this going in, that they wanted me to speak about the 3 themes. And the UN themes are Think Equal, Build Smart, Innovate for Change. And I'll tell you a little bit about the different stories I talked about in relation to that. Then there was a plenary Q&A, and that was the picture you saw, the 3 of us on the stage with our headsets, because we had real-time interpreters. There was maybe 1 or 2 women in the audience that spoke English, and I certainly didn't speak Arabic. Following that, we had breakout sessions, and some other Canadian experts were there. So the woman that did the solid waste audit, and there's a woman that's a gender equity specialist that was doing some training. They did a breakout. So there was a breakout on kind of infrastructure, capacity building. The mayor from County of Colchester and I were a breakout around women leadership in municipalities, both from elected and staff. And then we had a networking lunch after that. So that was the day. And then, of course, the full day of work before the mission. And then I was lucky enough to have another day before that to do the sightseeing. So it was kind of a nice bonus. So my stories, it was interesting going into this because I thought, I live in Canada. We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I don't have any problems as a female. And then you start thinking about the stories, and it's like, well, yeah, I've come up against a few here and there, whether it's in this job or others. So what I also talked about was mistakes made, and that was more around the innovation side of things. So I told a story about a mistake made, and then just learning. And then my approaches when I come up against gender bias. So what we were told is, women in Jordan specifically that they work with, and maybe the rest of the Middle East, is that there's a perception that in the West, so Canada and the US, is that there's no gender bias at all. There's no racism. Everything goes swimmingly, everyone's equal. And what they wanted us to talk about was the fact that that's not the case. There is still some gender bias that we experience. And what that will do is provide them some kind of hope and optimism that we're still working on it, and there's ways that they can continue to work on it as well. We did talk about leadership challenges generally. The audience was all women, 80 of them, elected officials, a lot of staff. So there are a lot of city managers that are female, and most of them are engineers. So interestingly, graduating from engineering in Jordan, there are about 25% of the engineers are female. In Canada, that's 20. So we think we're far ahead, and you hear Middle East and there's perceptions, but in Jordan specifically, the women are very empowered when it comes to education. In Amman, it's a very cosmopolitan city. You know, women are working, and you know, it's funny they drive there. The whole Saudi Arabia thing about women not driving, like Jordan is much, much further ahead. And in fact, they're not very, they don't really like Saudi Arabia and their policies very much. So the women are quite empowered in the city. As you get further rural, I think the shift is bigger, disparity is bigger. So I don't think I have time to get into detail about my stories, but generally speaking, Think Equal for me was when I first became the general manager, and my portfolio included RCMP and fire. And at the time, the RCMP staff sergeant was pretty entrenched and did not like the idea that he had to be accountable to a female. So I talked here not only about thinking equal, but believing that you're equal when you're a female. And they asked me, you know, like, how did you come up against him and the fire chief, and you know, how did you come out swinging, and how did you come out strong? And I said, well, part of it was I didn't think I had anything to lose because I didn't think I was going to change them. It was kind of my practice on people that are gender biased. And then the other is I was very lucky to grow up with a mother who was a very, very strong and feisty individual, and I think that I channeled her all the time. So I got a laugh out of that. I think that worked through the interpreter fairly well. Build smart. You know, in terms of the UN, this talked about a lot of infrastructure. So an example here is how Laura, our engineer, looks at sidewalks and pathways that are wide enough to accommodate strollers, and making infrastructure inclusive for women and all kinds of people in our community. What I talked about as a leader is building smart teams. So when I became the CAO, there was a particular developer that was really quite aggressive and assertive, whether it was because I was a female or that was just that person's MO, I don't know. But in any event, I talked about whether that it is a gender thing or just a who's on the other side of the table thing. Is as a leader, I don't know everything. There's no way that I can, and I rely on a really good team. And so what I would do is, rather than be one-on-one with this developer who was doing end runs on staff, is I brought the staff in with me. So I bring in Gerry, our general manager over community planning. I bring in our civil engineer. I bring in a planner. And my philosophy about getting everyone in the room is you've built a smart team. And it means that everyone hears the same thing. And I said that I wouldn't keep meeting if the yelling and the fist pounding wasn't going to stop. And this person actually met that boundary and never did it again. So again, that was the story that I told them. And then Innovate for Change, I just told some stories about mistakes I've made, and it may be a stereotype, but that women have a tendency to be very hard on ourselves when we make mistakes. And I got a lot of nods in the audience. It's interesting saying a speech that you know is getting interpreted because you're not sure where they're at and if they're actually hearing it. It was quite fascinating. But I got a lot of nods, and I said, you know, mistakes are really about learning, so embrace the mistakes. And that was more of a general leadership story that I told. And there's more that I told, but it was a 15-minute speech and I don't have time. So these are the key focuses they asked us to address, and then we answered questions in the plenary that were specific to them. Here are some examples of the topics: economic development, strategic planning, there's a big gap there for them. Female community engagement, they asked how we do that. I talked a lot about our OCP process and different ways that council and staff are going out to the community. Small things like having childminders at town halls so that families can bring their children. They wanted to know a lot about addressing poor behavior from community members and from employees that they came up against, whether it was somebody who was rude or badly performing as staff, or someone that was condescending to them because they were female. So myself and the mayor were able to answer that. Gender parity issues in Canada, they asked us how come we're not 50-50? Why don't we have gender parity in Canada? And the answer I gave was, we're not that far away from a generation where women didn't go to work, as an example. I think we're closing in on 100 years of women being able to vote. It's not very long when you think about it. My mom chose not to work, but it was the norm, and that's only one generation away. A big one that we couldn't answer was infrastructure deficits in the face of underfunding. So their budgets actually get approved at what would be the equivalent of the provincial level. So municipalities don't approve their own budgets. And the law, the intent of decentralization, is to equally distribute the funds. But there are a lot of political issues that's still not occurring yet. So there were questions we couldn't answer, which was challenging. So some results of the event, support through shared challenges. We have a lot more in common with one another than we think. As I mentioned, optimism around facing gender bias, that there are tools to do so, commonalities, connectedness, and support for, facing and leading change as it relates to gender equity and municipal governance, generally speaking. So results for us, it really reminded me that gender bias is still an issue in Canada. I think our municipality specifically is well ahead of the curve in terms of our representation. We have a female mayor, it's our second one. Our staff, Gerry's actually outnumbered when it comes to the executive team. But interestingly, we still have a lot of gender bias in our departments. So we have departments that are almost entirely male. So we have one civil engineer that's a female. We're getting better in engineering with our engineering techs in terms of that parity. We have 7 career firefighters, one of which is a female. We have 2 males now coming into finance, so we're getting better there. Legislative services, HR, entirely female. So there's still bias. When you look strictly at 50-50, we're doing well. But when you look at traditionally male-dominated roles versus female, we have some ways to go. There are a lot of female elected officials and a lot of female staff in Jordan, and in fact for the councils in Jordan they have a quota system, so they have to elect females. The challenge is that there is a real tribal culture there, and that tribal culture, the tribes have been running essentially the local areas for millennia, and they still are behind the scenes. So in a lot of the rural areas, the women are essentially elected because the tribal leaders endorse them, and their wives and moms and sisters, and they don't have a voice. They're not empowered, and that's a huge challenge for that decentralized quota system. It's not working the way it should necessarily. And as I mentioned, if you look at the bottom one, challenges without clear solutions, I left feeling like I wanted to follow up with some of these people and workshop some solutions for them, but we just didn't have time. Business connections, obviously FCM. I got to know the Canadian FCM project manager, the team in Jordan, and then I met some municipal experts there. So the individual from the city of Calgary's solid waste, and then the gender equity expert as well. And then just the follow-up, I did have to do a report to FCM, which included everything that I've included here, presentation to you, and then I'm hoping to do a staff lunch and learn soon. And shukran is thank you in Arabic, and this is the treasury at Petra that I had the opportunity to go see, which is fabulous. So I want to finish by thanking council for supporting my trip there. It's important for everyone to know that FCM paid for the entire trip. District of Squamish contribution was essentially my salary for the days that I was there.
Thank you. Sounds like a fantastic trip. Are there any questions or comments from council? Eric?
I wondered if there is a term to the FCM's involvement in Jordan for the current program, which you mentioned was initiated in 2015, or at least the invitation came to Canada in 2015. I guess follow up from that, do you have the perception that there's extra value added in keeping that program going for a particular period of time? Do you feel if you were to go back, you'd be able to contribute, or Canada could be able to contribute that much more if we kept a continuity there with the program?
Thank you. So the invitation and the initial connection was in 2015 at the time the law came into play. And the scoping was in 2017. The official launch was July 2018. So it'll go until 2022. So at this point, they still are in the early stages of the project. The point of it being a term project when you build capacity is to ensure that the municipalities in that country can continue on and sustain it without international support. At this point, I think it's too early to say if 5 years will be enough or not, from my opinion.
Councilor Reese?
Are there other countries doing this as well, this type of thing?
The only other country I'm aware of right now is the US, because they were involved from the US aid point of view. Is that your question, or are you asking where else FCM is?
No, not SCM, but I mean, for example, in Jordan, dealing with municipal government empowerment, just what you're talking about, are there other countries that might be contributing to that project generally, maybe in different municipalities?
Not that I'm aware of, no. And the USAID as well is different from actually municipal capacity building. It's more traditional aid programs. I get the sense that Canada is a leader in this area, especially when it comes to municipal capacity building. That's anecdotal, though.
Any further questions? Councilor Stoner?
Thanks so much for the report back and for taking the initiative to go on this trip. I think it's really important to be able to share these lessons and bring the things back that you've done. So thanks for taking the time.
Yes, thank you. I'll just add a testament to your leadership and Squamish's leadership that they wanted you to go and do this presentation, be the keynote speaker there. So thank you very much for representing us so well.
I was happy to do it. I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity, definitely.
Thank you.
Sorry, I went over time. I could keep talking about it. It's so amazing.
Okay, next break.
I didn't even get into this.
So the next item on the agenda, this is a late addition. We received some feedback on one of the resolutions we sent to the LMLGA. And it's with regards to the climate action resolution that I proposed and I worked on with Christine Boyle, from Vancouver Council. It was based around her original resolution. So I think everyone on council received the feedback from the LMLGA. I received late last evening an update from Christine, which is in the blue, and this was her recommendation for edits. And the basic principle here is to agree with the majority of the removal of the whereas as proposed by the LMLGA, but keep some of the stronger language around the need for climate action in the resolutions. So I guess what's before council is to discuss whether or not we want to change what we propose to the LMLGA or not, and if so, then we might ask to have that endorsed this evening. So I'll open it up for any thoughts or comments from council. Councilor Race?
Well, it was your resolution initially, and I was wondering how you felt about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful of being the chair, not wanting to. Well, I guess what I got back from Christine is on par with what I was thinking. I was comfortable taking out the whereases, but I think the emergency piece is pretty critical to the resolution, and it's not something I would want to lose. I can accept there may be discussion on the floor of the LMLGA, and I'm happy to have that discussion, but I think we should start with the stronger word in the resolution. Councillor Herbert?
Yeah, I like the efficiency of this one. It gets right to the core of it, and I know that there's just so much to say on the topic, but I think getting right down to, like you say, highlighting the emergency and the immediateness of the action, when they're having that bigger percentage part of the whole equation, I think adds strength. So I like this slimmed down version. I'm happy to support that, but I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks. If any of those whereases that we dropped from there were important, I would entertain including them again, but I like the efficiency of it.
Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, I agree with what was just said, that I think the more succinct version works well. We haven't really lost, the intent of the other whereases. They're still in there, and the urgency piece is still in there. I like the additions that came from Councillor Boyle, with the exception of the last sentence that was added in, at levels that match the urgency the science makes clear, just reads a little bit funny to me. So I would suggest at levels that match the urgency of the issue. Or something along that.
Any further comments? Gerry?
Just to reinforce Councillor Stoner's comment, I do think that the suggested wording is a little bit clumsy, and Councillor Stoner's suggestion is fine with me, but it did read a little clumsy. Otherwise, I'm happy to.
Okay. Any further discussion? Does someone want to move then that we, propose, as per Councillor Stoner's amendment, this draft, and that we bring it forward to tonight's council meeting? Councillor Race, thank you. Councillor Stoner, thank you. Any discussion?
What was the exact wording? Sorry, can we go back?
At levels that match the urgency of the issue.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries. Thank you.
Fantastic.
So next we have the engagement strategy. Ms. Golbeck. You're up. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. My name is Tim Hoskin. I'm the Director of Recreation Services, and I'm here to talk to you today about Squamish Youth Strategy. I'd also just like to acknowledge a couple of the project members. Caitlin is from Youth Services with Sweet Sky Community Services, manages the Youth Resource Center.
You should invite
Would you like to come up here?
Oh, okay.
And Devin Gass, our Arts and Culture Manager, is one of the staff project team members, and Natasha Golbeck, of course, is one of our members. Today I'd like to, in our meeting, go over with you the background, talk about the Squamish demographic, what's happened to date, the policy alignment, how does this, what's led us to where we are today, then discuss the opportunity, and then to review, discuss, and to a council to adopt or adjust the recommendation on where we are with community engagement. It's an important step that that council has the ownership from the decision statement and has comprehensive understanding of where we're trying to go. So Squamish's demographic. Some of the things we know is that Squamish is one of the fastest growing communities in BC. Our population has increased by almost 50% between 2006 and 2011, which is double the average growth rate for BC. We are a very young community compared to the rest of British Columbia. Our median age is about 37 and 60% of the population is under 40. What's really important for youth strategy is we have a very fast growing youth population. And it's a bit anecdotal, but I had dinner with one of the nurses up at Squamish General Hospital, and she shared with me there were nearly 500 babies born at Squamish General Hospital last year. We have, what does this mean? And another key part is we have a large proportion of our residents that commute outside of Squamish. And why is that important when it comes to a youth strategy is the time where youth are most at risk is directly after school, weekdays 3 to 7. And if parents are commuting to the city, there's even more opportunity for potential getting into trouble. So a bit of background. The current public facilities, we have a Squamish Youth Resource Center that is contracted through City Sky Community Services. And as we well know, it's in pretty rough shape, and we're working to replace it under a bit of a different model at the new Buckley building. We have Brennan Park Recreation Center. Through the Squamish Nation, there's also Totem Hall, as well as Squamish Nation has a youth center in Brackendale. There's Don Ross Middle School, House Sound Secondary School, and we have outdoor facilities for youth, skate parks, BMX track, bicycles park, and of course all the other amenities. Youth engagement to date. We've actually done some pretty comprehensive engagement with youth. In 2013, we did a youth Speak Up, which was in partnership with Big Brothers Big Sisters, City Sky Community Services, School District, and worked with youth to come up with some recommendations, ideas on engagement, and what they would like to see within the community of Squamish. From this formed a teen advisory group, which was in existence from 2013 to 2016, with some great meetings, but the challenges around a teen advisory group is finding new members and continually being relevant. The Youth World Cafe at House Sound Secondary School. Apologies, I meant to put in the final date there. I believe that was 2017 or 2018. And Youth Engagement Strategy, the YES, which was completed in 2018. Some policy alignment. Well, Council's strategic plan has outlined that it is an ongoing priority. Youth and arts programming have been identified in the strategic plan, and the youth strategy is to include the Squamish Arts Councils and to develop more comprehensive art and culture programming. I think the economy and local jobs is also relevant within Council's strategic plan, and that is with our youth, primarily our youth from 18 to 24. How do we get them into the job market? Specifically, we have all of these openings and gaps around entry-level jobs. How do we get youth trained to potentially fill those roles as a university or school, even within district, within recreation services as lifeguards? There's these opportunities. Sorry. The official community plan gives gives very direct direction around the youth strategies to develop one with our partners. And specifically around youth engagement, to have involvement in decision making within our community. The real estate and facilities strategy is an opportunity as the district and partner agencies are developing infrastructure. There's opportunities to work together. There's opportunities to build parks, to build facilities, recreation or other that are inclusive of youth. And how do we get that cool factor that makes you want to go to a place? So what opportunity do we have? As I mentioned, there's a strong opportunity to collaborate with youth agencies. I've been very pleased and very optimistic. Our meeting invites and suggestions with various agencies, they've all come to the table with enthusiasm and direction to make this a reality. There's opportunity to coordinate and expand programs, resources, and spaces. So as I mentioned, from the real estate strategy, there's the youth hub. There's potential around working with Vancouver Coastal Health and developing various programs. So that can be shared space, that can be developing programs, that can be enhancing resources, such as greater involvement with Ministry of Families to take a greater role within the district, Vancouver Coastal Health when it comes to youth. We've identified themes from multiple youth engagement on what are the wants and needs of youth, and those have been embedded into the project goals to take us from what is it that youth need to how do we implement it. And we have policy and direction, and we want to check in with you as a new council that this is where you want to go, and to make sure we have your support and enthusiasm to sponsor this program. So the engagement opportunity, how can we best support our youth in Squamish to allow them to grow and to develop into their highest potential? So the next 3, 4, half dozen slides are the crux of the community engagement. So this is what staff and the project team are going to use to engage youth and engage the other agencies. So that's the engagement opportunity, the engagement question that really will be posed to the community. So a lot of words up here, a lot of, sorry for the amount of text on the page, but this is your opportunity to see the project purpose and let us know if we have it right. It does have room for some flexibility, even post council's direction. However, we want to make sure we have the core idea and council's support on this. I have underlined in emerging adults, 19 to 24. I do want you to consider the project team thinks it's a good idea, and that's the community project team, to include the term emerging adults 19 to 24 as part of the youth strategy. It has a lot of positives when it comes to job market, transitioning youth into adulthood, but it does come with more complexity, greater engagement, and greater level of resources and challenges. How do we engage that market? It's not as easy as going to the schools, the community center, and other places. So it does add a level of challenge. The Squamish Youth Strategy, we are looking to find where there's gaps and opportunities with our services, asking youth once again what they want, but really to take it from the what do you want to how do we deliver this. And the real opportunity in doing this with the with partner stakeholders is everyone's around the table hearing it and taking a holistic, comprehensive view of youth to deliver it from Squamish Nation, from school district, from the district of Squamish, and many others. So community engagement, here are the project goals. Bring your attention to the second bullet, where there will be comprehensive community engagement with youth service providers, and caregivers. So that's working with the youth councils, student councils at the various schools. The school district has offered and already set up a One World Cafe where we'll be working with the various school groups to engage the youth at the schools, but also with full acknowledgement that we have to do more than that, engage the youth at risk, go to the youth at risk of where they're at to get their involvement as well. So the core piece we're trying to answer, or the value we're trying to exude, is that youth need to be part of it. Youth need to be part of the decision making. Again, is to report on the gaps and the opportunities and then come up with the recommendations. And these are the themes that we've heard through various community engagement to date and that have been reviewed by the community project team. And that is youth engagement and decision making, youth spaces, including transportation, youth programs, leisure, art, culture, sport, youth health and wellness, including mental health, and transitioning into adulthood. What are the life skills, work experience, volunteerism, post-secondary that are needed to be a contributing member in our society. So these are our excited and committed community team representatives, Squamish Nation representatives from education, from health, and from recreation. School District 48 principals from Don Ross and House on Secondary School, RCMP Youth Liaison, Scott Community Services, so the Youth Resource Center and another manager involved in youth. Vancouver Coastal Health, Ministry of Children and Family Development, Squamish Art Council, and District of Squamish staff, recreation, arts and culture, transit, and then some support staff will be helping the community engagement. It's quite comprehensive. So the expected outcomes. The tangible is the youth strategy for council endorsement in the fall of 2019. Expected outcomes are stronger collaboration amongst youth service provider agencies to support youth. And this could ultimately lead from a strategy to greater collaboration, but more formal collaboration through a charter or partnerships on facilities and other ideas. But this is where we are right now, and that's a hope, and it might get there. But steps to get to that level of involvement. Community engagement. The recommendation is a collaboration to collaborate with our partners and with youth, which takes us up to the high end of engagement. As council knows, so this is not just sharing information or retrieving information, but some sharing of decision making without giving them decision making, but hearing the voices and very much a commitment to hearing the youth, hearing the community, and bringing that information as part of the strategy. So the recommendation is that District of Squamish endorse the engagement opportunity, project purpose, project goals, and set the level of engagement for the community engagement and collaborate for the development of youth strategy. So now we're at the point of questions, discussions, if there's any feedback. One I'd like to plant the seed is for these World Cafes or engagement, if any councillor is willing or wants to be part of that process, I think it's a great opportunity to see have our youth see council's involvement, and that this is a key priority for us. Thank you.
Councillor Raistlin, Councillor Clifford.
Thank you. Do we, when you talk about schools, are we talking about just the public system, or do we also try to include some of the private system? And I know there'd be fewer numbers, but is there any effort made to reach out to them, to a cafe, for example, and invite the private school kids of the same age to attend something like that?
It's a good point. So the next step is with our partner agencies is that actually we're going to interview each other, and one of the core questions will be is how do we be successful in engaging youth? So I expect a minimum we're going to see World Cafes at the local high school, Municipal, and potentially at the recreation center or youth center. But we're going to have to do more, and maybe that's visiting Coast Mountain, in Montessori potentially, and hearing their take as well. I think what's important is that we get the full spectrum of youth, not just the kids that are potentially at risk now, but the full upstream, because one thing that we know is that kids may be high functioning now. Most kids will face a time in their life where they struggle and will dip down and need support and resources. So we want to hear from those at risk now, those fully upstream to fully functioning, and that means various means or different media, different ways to reach out to those youth. So short answer, yes.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I was curious, I've used the term World Cafe a couple times.
Yes.
Can you run me through what one of those
Oh,
events
yes.
looks like?
Yeah, you bet.
Be noticed from
Yeah, World Cafe. So there's different tools for engagement. So there's the old school town hall where the people with the information stand up front and share the information. Quite often there's somebody yelling at them and not always very productive. So a way to shift that around is to create lots of smaller tables surround a gymnasium or auditorium where there's a facilitator at each table with a theme at each table. And a person or a group is free to walk from table to table, and it's usually set for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it might be. And the facilitator has, or a scribe has, poster board, and they address a question. So a question could be around youth mental health, and the facilitator could be an RCMP officer, would be representing mental health, and would take down everyone's ideas and thoughts on how do we grapple and that information. And then there could be one potentially around youth engagement or spaces or transit or recreation or art. And each of those would be facilitated. And then at the end of the day, all that information is collected and sorted, and then themes are emerge. It takes away from the one-to-one dialogue that can sometimes get testy, and provides opportunity for people going like this to potentially working together to find a solution.
Thank you. I saw on the side of it that this had happened previously, 2016, I think, with the X's on the date there. It was somewhere in the past. And the outcomes of that, where did that go? And
I believe, I'm trying to remember, but I was looking to see if Sarah was still here. I believe that was part of the OCP facilitation. So I was lucky enough to be one of the facilitators on that, and it was really great. And the student council and youth helped set that up, and were very involved. And a similar process was in 2013 around a Youth Speak Up, where partner agencies went into the schools and spoke with youth at the Youth Resource Center, and said, hey, what's going on, how can we do better? So we're hearing some pretty consistent themes. They're in kind of different words, but it's been consistent on what we would like to see today. So I guess where I would like to take this is just beyond engagement, and let's come up with some actions, and let's come up with strategy to move this forward.
Just lastly, I love the inclusion of the emerging now. Was that what the phrasing that for that category? I think that's very important. This seems to be a bit of a
gap.
There's been a gap there in the past. So,
if I could just address that, so it has been a consistent gap we have heard from ministries and others, is that funding stops when you hit 18. It's kind of a cold stop, so to speak. That there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of where to go from now, where to go from there. So it's definitely an area that should be explored. It's just if council wants to get their arms around that one, it is a bit of challenging.
So I have Councillor Anderson, then French, then Stoner, then Race.
Your presentation has highlighted life skills and work experience that relates to both volunteering and opportunity for part-time work, summer work, after school work. My question is, are we doing anything in the way of, is anybody doing any monitoring or measurement as regards the opportunities youth have for part-time employment in town, in Squamish?
I'm not aware of any formalized program or process. I would expect there's different agencies doing pieces, and it does highlight another opportunity. If we look at these problems holistically and together, perhaps we can combine resources to create a program together that could address that. So, for example, I know Sea to Sky, the Cutting Barriers program, has some jobs, skills development, and it's not directly aimed at youth, but there seems to be, maybe there's opportunity there. The Youth Resource Hub does put on programs. Perhaps there's opportunity to expand job skills or recreation. For us, for example, as recreation services, we're now seeing this gap of it's getting harder and harder to find youth to fill our entry-level lifeguard jobs or recreation leader jobs. And what would it look like if we work together with other agencies to create a job skills academy or a recreation academy where we're providing programs, potentially scholarships to get people interested in these jobs, and that could potentially expand to support other district positions or even other positions within the community. Just thoughts.
As a follow-up to that, I note on the community team, there isn't a representative from employment agencies, training innovations or similar type of agencies. Would there be merit in at least some consultation with those agencies regarding your program? They, after all, administer summer works and different programs of that nature.
I think that's a great idea, and they will be included as part of the community engagement to get their take on how do we take people from, especially if we're going to take on the emerging adults, is how do we get the job skills to these young adults. Yes, so short answer is yes, they will be involved.
I did have another, but not necessarily a follow-up, and that is, do you anticipate that your community team, as a community team, would be brought into the Brennan Park Master Plan process?
That's a good question. I think there's opportunity, especially around Vancouver Coastal Health, Sea to Sky Community Services, other agencies, especially around the wellness or the wellness center, that at least initially there would be some available square footage that we could partner with Vancouver Coastal Health. Very, very preliminary, but we had conversations with Vancouver Coastal Health and their needs for the next few years, and how do we align potential development that would work for both. So is that potentially moving some very simple services to Brennan Park? If that worked for them and worked for us, I think it would be a good thing.
Okay.
Can I just add to that briefly? It's a great question, Councillor Anderson, and I think the real opportunity here is answering the question of, youth are sharing with us that they have nowhere to go, and we have some places where they could go. And so we have to figure out what's the place that's most likely that they're going to be able to access and hang out and feel safe and feel engaged in. And what are the signals we send to them through programming, through amenities, through transportation, whatever, that this is a place that they're welcome and safe and should be coming to. So that might be Brennan Park, and in that case, I think the outcomes of the strategy would be very closely linked into the Brennan Park Master Plan, or it might be the youth hub, or it might be some other location that we have a list of some options, or I know one of the council priorities that we're taking really seriously in our department is increasing utilization of multi-purpose space. So I think that's, for example, a really close tie-in to this strategy. How do we get the youth in the space so that they do feel like they have a place to go and they're engaged with adult relationships and healthy activities and so on.
Councillor French.
Thank you. It looks like some great work has been put into this. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is I sort of feel like there is something of an emphasis on young people who are thinkers and not necessarily athletes. We do a really great job of offering programs for those that are athletic. And as the father of a child who is a real thinker that had no interest in athletics, I heard often that there was a gap there for people that fit into that category of wanting to have engaged intellectual conversation. So I'm encouraged by that. And that had me thinking I should throw a plug in for the vacancy on the Public Art Committee. There's no youth representative on that committee. And it's the kind of opportunity that is not broadly popular, but for any young person that's interested in the arts and leadership, it's a great opportunity, and I'd love to have that position filled. So anybody knows young people who are artistic and want to develop their leadership, encourage them to apply for that vacancy. And your list of partners, it didn't include Quest. And I'm just curious to know, have they been engaged in your process so far? And is there maybe an opportunity for them to be even more engaged than they are now?
It's a good question. So with Quest, if it's endorsed to work with the emerging adults, I think the level of engagement with Quest elevates. So I would suggest it would elevate to a partner organization if they are interested. If that's not the direction of council, then they will be engaged as a community member. If you invited the World Cafe to give their feedback. So it really depends on how they're identified as a stakeholder. If it's at the highest level, because we're going up that youth age group that they have. If we're not, then they will be engaged at, I wouldn't say a lesser, but a little lower on the spectrum and the level of engagement. And
one final thought, I would be very interested in attending any future World Cafe events. That intrigues me. Great to be a part of it.
Thank you, Councillor.
So, thank you, Councillor Stoner and Councillor Race, and I'll add myself to the list.
Thanks so much. So a few thoughts and questions. I guess my first question is, last year we did the Youth Engagement Service Strategy, 2018 was complete. So how does that fold into this process?
Great. Again, good question. So the Youth Engagement Strategy was a report card on how the district is doing, or how the community is doing with youth. So between the Youth Engagement Strategy, the Youth Speak Up, through advice we heard from the Teen Advisory Committee, we have a pretty good grasp of what youth are bringing forward, is what the challenges are. So the next step is to take that information and say not just what is the challenge, but now how do we fix it, or how do we implement it. So my view is that the report card tells us where we were at the time, and now the next step is let's come up with a plan to fix it, or to take it to address the challenges, the gaps in service, for example.
Okay. I appreciate the effort that's gone into building the community collaborations and the partnerships and the enthusiasm amongst the other service providers. I think that's really great. One of the things that makes me a little bit nervous is the lack of representation in youth around the project committee to date, or what the list was there. If I go back to the project purpose, it says ensure youth are seen as partners in their own future. I think a large part of this is about allowing them to co-create this vision and the implementation plan. So I think that we can do that in part through outreach, but I would argue that we're not at a level of collaborate in this structure with youth. We're at a level of consult. And I think that we really need to be careful about that, and I urge us to create either more vacancies on that project team and bring in youth voices directly to the table. What I would like to see is that this be more so a process that is led by youth and supported by the adults, as opposed to it being led by the adults and being consulted with youth. And then on the emerging adults piece, I'm still not really clear on what the pros and cons are of folding that in. To me, it feels like the needs and the solutions and the engagement strategies are really different for emerging adults. And so I don't fully understand the benefits of rolling it into one process. So I'll leave it to you to think about that.
address that? Do you want us to try to address that now?
If you'd like to.
Sure, take a stab at it. So with youth and engagement, the intention is to be fully collaborative with youth. Where we are right now is we, one, needed to gauge the level of involvement with partner agencies to see if there was support, because it could change the dynamic of what this looks like. For example, if the school district wasn't involved, or Vancouver Coastal Health, or if they said, yeah, we're super involved, and not only do we want to do this with you, but we want to make it a charter, for example, that changes things. So we needed to have that discussion, and I needed to hear, and we'll hear from them, okay, what does true community engagement mean and look like with you? Because they bring in a very unique perspective from where they come from the school district, the Vancouver Coastal Health, to youth services. So our commitment on the full project charter and how it's described as the adult table and then the youth table, and working side by side to make these recommendations. So I think it's important that the adults are there, because it does bring the eyes of the resources and I guess some other realities that can be forward, and then some of the opportunities around collaboration to work together to solve the challenges. So my commitment is that there will be strong collaboration with youth. I'm sorry, what was the other?
About the benefits of emerging adults.
The benefits with it, including emerging adults, is it's a gap. As I mentioned, the ministry provincial support stops at 18 generally if it comes to mental health, and I guess that's it. The challenge with it is I mentioned as resources is well, that creates another. It broadens the scope that we weren't necessarily anticipating, which means more staff time, more resources, but also that's a pretty broad a group of 13 that has very different needs. So there is potential to water down the project. I think some of these challenges can be overcome where there's just specific recommendations for different age groups, different demographics, that sort of thing. But there is a challenge there. It's not just go do it. But it is one staff are willing to take on, and I think there's opportunity to make the lives better of some 19 to 24-year-olds by doing this.
Councillor Rees?
Thank you. I was just going to comment on the World Cafe and my recollection of it. And I'm not an expert. I thought it was a valuable thing. And I think actually, if I recall correctly, most councillors, if not all councillors, showed up for that. I mean, we just basically put it on our agenda. And so if we're going to hold them, I think it is important for us to kind of approach it that way. And everybody come out as they can. The other thing with that is, and I'm hardly an expert in these things, but that one was focused on the OCP and OCP type of issues. That's a pretty broad range, but I think going into it without some kind of a theme would be kind of all over the place. And so I think we'd have to give some thought to what theme we might have for the next one, for example. And it also gives, I think, the students, there'd be some prep work, and sort of trying to visualize this in my own mind. There'd be some prep work. In other words, they would have the theme a month ahead of time, have a chance to kind of look into it, research it if they wanted to, think up some thoughts along it. So, but it was certainly a valuable experience, absolutely. The other is just while I'm speaking is the comment on the emerging adults. And I'm generally in favor of that. I take Councillor Stoner's points, about one size doesn't fit all. I think that's maybe just obvious, and I think we'd have to gauge it that way. But I think of, just a number of different examples, sometimes in recreation, for example, sports activities, where you get to a point and then there's nothing and you kind of just fall off, and it's into the abyss. And so that's a very critical age in my mind, having gone through it myself, and so surviving a little bit. So I think it is important to kind of direct some of our activities there. And it's maybe obviously not exactly the same as we would do with kids that are in high school, but I think it is an important age. So I would certainly support, in general terms, that approach to this strategy.
So I'm going to take some time for myself, and then I'll give it to Councillor Herford. On thoughts on the emerging adults, I guess my question would be, does it make sense to roll this in, or I can see the need, but is this a separate thing, or is it part of this one? And I'm not quite sure that it's all one thing as opposed to a separate project. I do share Councillor Stoner's, I guess, questions or concerns about whether, if it makes sense for there to be a youth table and an adult table, and we're collaborating with both tables, but they're separate tables. Do we, given what's in the report card and the feedback we got, do the youth need to be at the same table right from day one? And I have a bit of a sense that was kind of the request from the youth, and that was the one thing. And that's maybe easier to say, well, do that than to actually do it. But that is sort of my sense. Along this line, though, and we are talking about a youth strategy, one of the other things we've mentioned at this table is a focus on 8 to 80. And just like to hear a bit of feedback or thoughts about how we are thinking about the youth strategy in an 8 to 80 sort of way of thinking as well.
I'm not sure I understand that. So the youth strategy is looking at 13 to 24 in the context that from 8 to 80. Maybe I'll have you elaborate first, but it's definitely focusing in on an age group. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, sorry. I guess what I'm sort of wondering is, do we split these off into? I mean, we have a clear direction from the youth that they want some focus and need some focus, and so we're looking at doing that. I guess in parallel to that, I think there's been discussion about making Squamish in general more inclusive to all age groups, and I guess it's a bit more of an open question about how those two things fit together. Maybe they don't. Are we thinking about the 25 to 80 strategy next, or just wondering.
It's a challenge. Every segment of a demographic has specific needs, and I think we need to be cognizant that as staff, when we're focusing in on a strategy on any demographic, we need to look at the broader implications to the whole community of Squamish. So what that could mean is like the Brennan Park example, the recreation center example is if we're developing a recreation center, adding a wellness center on that, the youth strategy should provide us some guidance around how do we make that accessible and cool for youth. I don't think that would say in lieu of making it accessible for seniors or for another group, but it would be a consideration that there'd be space for youth for hanging out, for example. I'm not sure if there would be I'm trying to think of another example. You want to take a stab?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think, in this increasingly pressured facility environment that we are in, one of the key learnings I think going forward is that very few population groups are going to have their own dedicated space, and that we have to make things, as you suggested, work for everybody, work for 8 to 80. We also know that youth are exceptionally easy to alienate, and they have a very low threshold for disengaging. And often it's things like shared space with groups that they don't identify with. And so part of finding the balance between those competing needs is going to be what we're going to be digging into with the youth themselves and with the sort of programmer experts that work in this field also. Does that help?
I think there's opportunities to look at mentorship, multi-generational programs, these sort of things. So in that sense, we would be having a broader lens of the complete demographic of Squamish when we're looking at this. But we do need a narrow scope so we have clear direction on what we're focusing on.
Now, and a final question from me is, you made some reference to at-risk and underserved youth. And maybe it's something that we plan will come out of the engagement, or do we have a sense ahead of time about our responsibility for youth who are particularly underserved and at-risk and struggling, and versus sort of saying, well, that's more the social service sector should be taking responsibility for that, and our responsibility is the sort of broader spectrum of youth. Do we have a sense of where we are in that?
Yeah, the mandate for health, mental health, family is with the province, and I think historically it's been underserved by the province in Squamish. I think Sea to Sky Community Services has stepped into that role and provided excellent support for potential youth at risk. I think working, and what I'm excited about is the provincial partners coming to the table is that can be potentially examined. And by working more closely together, my hope, there's been no commitment to this, is that it might result in a minimum of greater awareness and hopefully greater resources from the province to support it.
Caitlin, I saw you sit forward a little bit. I think, did you have something you wanted to add? Or?
No, I'm just thinking more. Thanks.
Councillor Herfield?
Thank you. I like the idea of including that emerging adults, I think we called it. And I do have questions around the engagement, what that would look like with the lower age categories. We have these collecting points, schools that are easy enough to access for the World Cafe. And where are you at in the planning process if we do open up, if we do decide to endorse chasing that other demographic, what sort of engagement with that process?
It needs further conversation, and that's what's great about having the community support of other agencies. I think Quest, as we heard, is an opportunity. I think job skills, if it's working with the province, sorry the proper name eludes me, but working with the job skills through the province and seeing what's available there. We need to have a more wholesome, well-rounded conversation, and frankly, it is a challenge. It's not an easy engagement demographic group to target. They're not all sitting in one place, generally, as most youth are. They've moved on to some moved out of Squamish. Do we want to interview the types of people that, hey, we can't stay in Squamish anymore? That creates a challenge of how do we approach those sort of folks that are potentially more transient or not collected in one spot. So if you have some ideas, fantastic. But it does need a more wholesome discussion.
I'm inclined to move the recommendation, but I'm curious about that portion of it, whether we should do some more scoping to figure out where that is. So we understand if it's twice the resources of excluding that demographic. Not that we lose that piece, but that it might have to get broken off into its own, or spun off into its own piece rather than diluting the overall. But I don't know that any of us have enough information to really weigh that. So I'm not sure how to go forward there. I'd be interested to hear my fellow councillors' thoughts on how we go from here.
Ms. Golbeck?
Yeah, just to that point, I'd suggest also that it would be more effective from a resource perspective for us to bucket these things together than to do them separately, because we already have a little bit of meeting infrastructure together that we can draw from. The activities, the engagement activities are different, but I think realistically what might happen, unless council directed us strongly otherwise, is if we piece this part out but wanted to keep doing it, that it would get pushed back quite a ways and then not be included in the strategy. There's some benefits to that with an increased focus on this particular 13 to 18 demographic, but then we lose the sense of, the life cycle piece, the continuity in kids' lives and how their issues evolve as they hit that 17, 18, 19 year kind of clip.
Mr. Hoskins?
Maybe if I can help get our arms around it a little bit. I think there's a strong opportunity that we have the agencies around the table. I think it's opportunistic that we take this on, but if it becomes too cumbersome, we risk coming up with a strong, comprehensive youth strategy. Then we potentially put that on hold. But I think while we got the people around the table and the energy and the enthusiasm, we take it on. And we can come back to council, or council can give staff the direction, the discretion that say, hey, that's a bit much at this point. Might be a way to move it forward.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor French in a second, just before, because I heard Councillor Herford almost thought about moving this. Before we move it, I just wondered.
Inclined to. Well, this is what I did. So.
Just like to make sure that we hear from staff, to make sure that you have everything you need to be clear on moving forward beyond just the resolutions. Councillor French?
Yeah, good timing, because Councillor Stoner's thoughts about youth being directly involved in the participation, I'd like to see some wording around that in the motion so that we're clear at this table that we expect young people to be involved in the process.
Did you have particular wording in mind?
No. I was hoping someone with more skills than me might have some thoughts on how to incorporate that into the motion. And additionally, I like the idea of emerging adult being rolled into this process.
Councillors, can I go to you while we think about wording?
Sure. And it was just on this issue of emerging adults, and I am inclined to want to see it included in this, partly because for me this strategy is not a 6-month strategy or a 1-year strategy, it's indefinitely in the future. And so the people that are, say, 17 today, in a couple of years will be in that emerging adult group. And I don't think we want to just say, sorry, goodbye. I think we want to be able to continue with them until they get to a bit of an age where they might just disengage on their own, because now they're really on their own 2 feet and off and running. So I just wouldn't want to stop it at 18. I take the points, I understand this is obviously, it's a different group of people in a lot of ways. There's going to be different strategies around it, but I would just want to include it in the overall thing so that we don't have these things going off in a different timeline or a different path or somehow separate, because I think it is one continuum to me. It just, as people are going to get older, they're going to move from one to the next. We want to continue serving. And I'll go back to drafting that resolution.
Okay. So maybe I'll ask, Councillor Stoner?
I'll just speak to that, and I have come around to the idea of including the emerging adults. I think, Tim, your discussion of with the collaboration partners around the table and the enthusiasm there, then that's a good time to broaden that scope and see where we can take it. Just being cautious of what does that do with the actual process, and making sure that we're being clear about engaging both of those groups now moving forward, and I think that that's fine. Let's capitalize on the enthusiasm that we have around the table. With regards to making sure that youth are at the table, if we are going to go forward with that concept of having a youth table and an adult table, I'd recommend that there are at least some folks from the youth table that are liaisons, so it's not just the adults that are the liaisons. Let's make it happen both ways. But still a little bit hesitant around just having those two as the only really youth empowerment piece with how this is coming about. So how early on can we bring youth in, I think is really important. You come up with that resolution yet, Doug?
Working on it. Keep talking.
So we come up with a resolution out of pieces that you would appreciate more clarity on in terms of where council's is at?
Just that there's opportunity to address it within the project goals or the project purpose, and then the resolution can simply stay the same. So you can direct staff to update the project purpose to include more robust language around youth engagement.
Please.
Sorry, I'm going to join the table because I feel like there's a philosophy that council might like to embrace, which we worked, the youth engagement strategy that was completed in 2018 worked on a for us, by us, as well as the nothing about us without us philosophy that was kind of developed and curated through the city of Surrey. And so I feel like those two specific sayings probably fall in line with what I'm hearing from around the table in terms of council. And if that's helpful at all.
So we have someone ready to move something?
Well, just, I'm not moving it. I was just, my suggestion would be that we just add another paragraph to the resolution. So in addition to what we see on the agenda, that we add a second paragraph that representatives of youth and emerging adult groups be added to the working groups forming a youth strategy. It's deliberately a little general.
Seeing lots of head nodding. Does someone want to move that?
I'll move it.
Councilor Stormer, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Councilor Stormer?
I'm really excited to see this moving forward. Thank you so much for all the hard work to date, and can't wait to be part of the engagement pieces, the little cafes, and to move this piece forward. I think it's really, really critical for our community as a whole. So thanks.
And as a parent of a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old who both were born here and grew up here, I'm pretty excited about this as well as an opportunity for the young people who are following my children and growing up as well.
Anyone else? Councilor Race?
Yeah, thank you. And I don't have kids, but I think that this is actually critical and essential for a properly functioning community. That we have something. I guess it's a very, very important group of people, and we want the best outcomes from it.
Okay, well, I'll just say, let me know about the World Cafe. I'm looking forward to that. And so with no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
How does everyone feel? Do you want a 5-minute file break and then, or just go through
We're
the list?
running ahead of time.
Okay, so take a 5-minute file break, so we'll be back at 3 o'clock. Welcome back. And back to the Committee of the Whole for April 2nd, and we are on to the Arts and Culture Strategy. And his guest, would you like to fill us in on what we're talking about?
I would love to fill you guys in on what we're talking about. For those watching, my name is Devin Guest, and I'm the Manager of Arts and Culture here at the District of Squamish. We are here today to talk about the Arts and Culture Strategy, more specifically the process in which we were about to undertake. And two things that I want to just get addressed off the top is that throughout the presentation, I'll say arts and culture, I'll say culture. They all, let's just for the sake of the presentation, understand that we're using them interchangeably. Second, Mr. Hoskins' great presentation on the youth engagement strategy. Staff acknowledged that there's going to be similarities and relationships between these two strategies, and we want council to be made aware that we have that lens on both of them as the priorities and outcomes kind of bubble up within each strategy. So those are my 2 points. Our objective here today is to receive feedback on the process
Would you like to introduce the other people at the table?
Oh, I'm
beside
sorry,
you?
yes, of course. This is Amy, last name Liebenberger, from the Arts Council, the new executive director as of mid-February, we'll say?
November.
Just kidding, November.
Yep.
And so we welcome her around the table as we talk about the arts and culture strategy. Has it really been November? That was my bad. As such, we should probably acknowledge the outgoing executive director / former chair / contributor, Sydney Lyons, who has spent the last 4 years dedicated to the Arts Council as well. So our objective here today is to receive feedback on the process as outlined in the report and in the presentation, gain endorsement from council, and which will finalize the direction as we move forward throughout the execution of this strategy within the year. Just some quick background. Throughout municipalities across BC, Canada, typically cultural resources and activities emerge organically in silos. And when we talk about silos, we really talk about subsects of art. So fine artists, film, all the different, they typically emerge through silos. And Squamish is no different, having seen that over the last, 100 years. Leadership from the Squamish Arts Council in the last specifically 3 to 4 years has seen a real focus on strategically driving arts and culture experiences within our community, and there has been a positive uptick in our community in those cultural experiences. The cultural landscape within Squamish I'll address in future slides, but it is rich and within some areas emerging and others mature. With the proposal of the Arts and Culture Strategy, it aligns with the newly created position in 2018 of Arts and Culture Manager, which was born out of the need to basically service creative industries underneath the umbrella as outlined. The strategy here proposed today is to maximize the cultural life in our community and leverage it with the existing, let's use the word levers or assets or resources that kind of already exist. So you'll see a definition of arts and culture up on the screen. For those in the audience, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, otherwise known as UNESCO, is kind of the world-leading body. I can assure you at length there are passionate conversations in the world on what definition of arts and culture to use. But staff recommend this one as guided by UNESCO. I also wanted to put that up there as I thought it was important to determine the definition so that the lens could be applied consistently across the process. And this, albeit an overwhelming slide, it's adopted from the StatsCam framework of cultural resources. But I wanted to acknowledge where we are in our growth and our journey to contribute to facilitating cultural experiences in our community. So this also, I'm going to take as an opportunity to address heritage specifically. For scope purposes, we are including the term social heritage as a part of this project. Social heritage is defined by cultural activities, the historical society, as opposed to physical heritage, which speaks to form and character of physical buildings and assets within our community. Physical heritage is is a specialty that exists or would exist in our planning department through their policy development, and therefore has not been included in the scope of this strategy. I want to park the conversation around that until the end, but I would like council to keep that top of mind as I'd be seeking feedback on that particular direction. Here, by no means inclusive, here is a snapshot of Squamish's cultural assets. Wow, that's really small up there, huh? You know, craft production and social experiences, markets, fairs, festivals, Squamish Nation culture, arts and language leadership, visual arts, galleries and makers, arts programming, community groups, performance and film, and social heritage, just to name a few. As I said, although not an exhaustive list, its intent is to spark the acknowledgement of the vast cultural experiences the community has accumulated over the years. So when we started to look at putting together an arts and culture strategy and a process to support the strategy, we looked at what questions we wanted to answer. So this is kind of the second touch point in terms of, we'll be, at the end, I'll be looking specifically for feedback on these 3 questions and whether or not we've hit the mark. So another check-in point for council. We are using these questions to spark thought, consideration, and planning for the strategy. As we've said, staff are looking to maximize existing resources to set the direction towards the desired outcome in this strategy. The goals of the strategy are quite simple: to establish desired outcomes in driving planning and decision making, reporting on gaps and opportunities, and a report on recommendations and outcomes that can be actioned for 2020 and moving forward. The strategy phases. This is an overview of the phases that will take us through December, January. I'm going to skip forward quite quickly just so that we can get to the meat here. This is what staff are proposing today and are seeking feedback on, so this is kind of the third touch point. This process is designed with the IAP2 framework in mind and falls under the IAP2 is kind of the analogy used to talk about IAP2 is like a tap, on or off, and so it exists somewhere between evolve and collaborate on the tap/spectrum, if that makes sense. So phase 1, to collect, inventory, and establish existing information. The activities that we'll use to support this are stakeholder identification, demographic analysis, policy reviews, and analysis of arts and culture sectors. Phase 2, obtain input from the community on their interests and needs. This is obviously a meaty portion of the phasing of the process. Community surveys, workshops, and intercept surveys at community events. This is where we're going to be using existing cultural experiences throughout our community to gain the information that we're seeking. To draw together findings from research and community engagement to establish direction. We'll be using the SOAR strategy of strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results, and looking at goals and strategies within the community framework for review. Phase 4, to prepare and adopt, prepare and draft an arts and culture strategy and implementation plan. Obviously, a needs assessment, draft strategy, and implementation plan will come in the fall. And then finally, to finalize a strategy with community and stakeholder review for draft strategies and presentation to council. Ta-da. Implementation of recommendations and outcomes will be addressed in 2020 planning. Organizationally, everything proposed today works within the existing work plan. From an OCP policy perspective, it's I'll let the audience read those. I won't read them out loud, but staff generally acknowledge that Council's priority towards arts and culture programming is supported within OCPs and specific policies as outlined in the report. Council priority areas, specifically economy and local jobs, arts and culture programs, services and resources we know play an increasing role in enhancing civic pride, defining community identity, and attracting talent and investment needed for cities, municipalities, to prosper in a creative and knowledge-based economy. Neighborhood connectivity in public spaces. By better understanding how our citizens choose to participate or engage in their experiences, specifically culture and arts experiences, we can leverage our spaces to better suit their needs. And so, specifically, I gave Council kind of 3 touch points that staff are seeking feedback on. And so now I turn it back to you guys, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can you put the 3 questions back on?
Yeah.
And I know Councillor Anderson probably won't have any thoughts, but does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Councillor French?
The Public Art Committee has a lifespan of 5 years, and I know we're close to the end of that. Is there a specific date attached to the winding up of that committee, or determining what happens next with it?
Oh, through you, Chair. The committee and staff would go through within the terms of reference, there are criteria, soft criteria, in terms of when the committee is ready to launch or be self-fulfilled. So I would suggest that the Public Art Committee reviews those and kind of takes a litmus test and to determine where they are in that process.
Good, thanks.
Councillor Race and then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I know, notice rather, that you, sort of the 4th bullet point is a facility needs assessment. And over the past few years, I've had discussions with different people in the Arts Council and the chairs about coming to council and sort of starting a discussion on what they think might be needed for facilities. And not that anybody can promise spending money today on it, and I appreciate that there might be some public engagement in this. I suspect, though, it might be more, rather than start off in a vacuum, it might be more focused if the council had some idea of what they were looking for. And from our part, at least for me, allocation of land, whether it's in 1 place, 2 places, 3 places, whatever sort of a format might be, is kind of a critical thing when the community is going through a development cycle like this, to start thinking of those things. And so if we had a discussion at council, even before a lot of the other stuff was resolved, to try and get some sense of what the council might think is necessary or desirable going into the future, so we can start making certain land, in our own minds, land allocations. As I say, there's been a bunch of general offline comments and discussions, and so it's just, to me, I think we want to start focusing on some locations relatively soon, so we can just ensure that they're there when we actually can fund it.
I think that's an excellent comment. I would also say that it would be very exciting to have that conversation around this table. It's also being had as a part of the real estate master plan strategy. If I may be as so bold as to say, the City of Vancouver is undertaking a creative city strategy right now, and I've been attending some of those workshops. And Squamish is in a unique position right now that they still arguably have access to land, whereas the City of Vancouver does not, for creative experiences, cultural experiences, so on and so forth. So, thank you for your point.
Councillor Anderson.
It's really exciting to see this come along because we've been at it a long time in the arts and cultural and heritage communities and advocating for this, and over a decade in my experience, and so it's really a great day. I am going through the report and wearing the hat, or as I have over the years in heritage activities as well as the Arts Council. I'm a past director. I see the references to the role of cultural strategy, the venues, facilities, and media concerned within an arts and culture strategy, and the experiences that we want to deliver for residents and for visitors. It's a part of our tourism strategy as well. And I have a close colleague on Tourism Squamish board who works with me on these things, and she's there to emphasize this with her board as well, the importance of arts and culture and heritage for our tourism sector. What I'm saying here is, as I read through the report on these particular items from role to venues to experiences we want to deliver, that heritage is a part of it quite understandably and easily can be understood as such. In addition, all of these years of advocacy, I have to reflect that the organizations have been working together and I'll just highlight the Parks and Recreation Master Plan from 2010, I believe the year was, quite explicitly highlights all three as part of a package. For example, and we have ways to go in various ways to understand how that works. Councillor French is affiliated with the Public Art Committee, but I can report that people working with heritage, interpretive kiosks and whatnot face all of the same issues and challenges as public art. Whether it's liability, maintenance, or how do you pay for these things, there's a lot of overlap in summary. Your comments regarding the what is special about heritage that belongs to another department or another initiative, I quite agree with and I found very helpful. That is that the planning department is going to be concerned with conservation and protection issues that will not necessarily, and maybe not very usefully, be a part of this strategy. Strategy and policy can also be distinct. However, there is one area, though, that is of critical interest to the heritage community, and that is an archives facility. So I just wanted to mention that, because that's not actually a planning department issue either. It's more real estate. But it is a facilities matter, which may, in fact, it is highlighted here in your report. Archivist-run education, preservation of knowledge. So just to highlight that piece of overlap. But then the question arises, I do agree that there's parts of the heritage puzzle that belong elsewhere. But if we look at the examples of Whistler and numerous cultural scan activities or projects in other communities where there is an integrated view, can we take your proposed process and include those aspects of heritage where there is such substantial overlap in role, experiences, venues, and media? Do we need to change language? Do you suggest that we can still include much of the heritage project in this strategy?
In response, what I would say is that, as indicated, the social heritage would be part of the arts and culture strategy. So yes, heritage components would reside within that strategy, and with the finer point of form and character, physical structure being kind of parked for policy. I really liked your comment about strategy and policy can exist separately, and I think that Squamish is if Squamish were an artist, we would be an emerging artist in the arts and culture strategy. When we look at many of the mature municipalities, Bowen Island, West Vancouver, City of Vancouver, there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to take in from their robust specific strategies. We're walking before we run, and there will no doubt be years to come of existing strategy and development and policy and good work.
Can I just add one quick thought to that? I'm really appreciating this conversation as well. I think the thing to keep in mind is that the purpose of the strategy is to identify what are our desired outcomes for the community from an arts and culture perspective, and what are the activities that are going to have the biggest return on investment towards those outcomes. And some of that might be in the heritage realm, and it might be a heritage policy. We'll have to talk about that and look at what are our outcomes versus our activities. And we're happy to, and think it's relevant to include, any aspect of heritage that seems relevant. And if council wants to direct us particularly on which aspects to include, we'd be happy to take that feedback. Thank you.
And Amy, do you have any thoughts to add from the Arts Council perspective, or maybe questions for Councillor Stack?
No, we're at the very beginning, like you said, walking before we run, and we're just extremely excited about this endeavor, and we're so happy to collaborate in any way possible.
Councillor Anderson, did you have another?
Just a little bit of follow-up if I may. I believe that the heritage community, of which there's 7 organizations here, and there's lots of different reasons for that, the Historical Society being one of those 7 organizations, will be able to help. It needn't be daunting. I think there's lots of stuff ready on the shelf that people have been impatiently waiting to deliver in a venue like a discussion forum. I guess the follow-up question I have is, would you consider the first 2 parts of your 5-part process to be something like a culture scan, as other communities define that exercise?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That's the Squamish cultural assets. There are many points within those categories. There's many clubs and community groups that all bring a voice to this.
And I would suggest that the heritage committee will be most likely very pleased and ready, and again, doesn't need to be a daunting process to integrate their input, at least into those parts of the process. I'll just further point out that there's just a small thing, but the OCP policies you have highlighted in the report are in fact from the old OCP, but they are carried over. That's section 14 from the 2009, but there's so much carryover. It's just a small point, but the new section is section 27, and it's a little bit fuller with a lot more words to it, but essentially saying the same thing. Your definition of culture, I think, is very important. You use the UNESCO definition. I think it's important that it be broad enough to encompass all what we mean by that cluster of those experiences. And this point has been emphasized to me by the Municipality of Whistler Cultural Program lead staff person, John Ray, spoke very eloquently on this at a recent gathering in North Vancouver, where the whole corridor was represented in a seminar day, and illustrated Whistler's experiences with that. And of course, you may be aware that they're involved with an a geopark kind of a concept, and fitting that into it as well, natural history experiences. So Mr. Ray's comments on the importance of defining culture broadly, I think will be very valid for us. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
Thanks so much for bringing this forward. I don't have a huge amount to add, with the exception of appreciate the connection that has happened with Tim still sitting here and the youth engagement strategy. And the other one that it just kind of flagged for me was any overlap with the Squamish Industry Innovation Program that's happening through economic development, and they're doing a mapping of some of the creative spaces, and so just ensuring that those match.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
we
they-
have. Actually.
So, Councillor French, and I'll put myself on the list quickly.
Okay. I'm totally on board with Councillor Anderson around the importance of heritage and having heritage incorporated into this. To the extent of I'd like to see the name of this strategy, what we're actually referring to is arts, culture, and heritage strategy. Just formalize it one step further.
Okay, so I guess the one comment I wanted to add is the importance, especially in our economic development plan. We're looking at a lot of innovative, creative-based sectors, and I believe arts and culture plays an absolute critical role in that. So I see this as pretty foundational to a lot of our economic development aspirations, and I'm very pleased with what I see here so far. I'm getting a sense from council that there's general support for this. Is there anything that you would appreciate more clarity on before someone moves this? Or could we add some? Oh, Councilor Stoner.
Sorry, now these questions are up. A small change to the first one that I'd like to propose is, instead of what are the district's levers to support access, is what are the levers within the district? Because I don't think it's necessarily just the district of Squamish that has those levers, but there might be other organizations within the community that we're looking to bring forward into that conversation. So it's a minor nuance, but I read that differently the second time I looked at it.
Anything else you would like clarity on or feedback?
I'm good for feedback. What I thought I might leave folks with is that it would be great to have your participation in the community engagement as well, so that we're sure we're capturing your feedback and that you can hear the community's feedback about their answers to these questions. And we can continue that dialogue at this table as we get recommendations.
So I think I heard Councillor French move this, or wanting to move this maybe with an addition of the word heritage. Is there a seconder? Was that clear? Would you like to read that maybe?
Do you want to add that to the motion that's already proposed on the agenda?
I think that was the intent. Was it John? To add the word heritage to the resolution?
Arts, culture, and heritage.
Okay, so then I have a suggestion, so as part of the feedback, to add the word heritage to the name of the strategy, making it the arts, culture, and heritage strategy.
So a second. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. So I haven't closed or terminated or anything. What do I do next?
Close this.
Okay.
We want to
Open
terminate
the
this one?
special. Open the special.
So move that the meeting be terminated.
Close this. This is, you terminate this.
Okay. Okay, so move to terminate from Councilor French, second by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion
And
carried.
we'll